This is gonna take crackerjack timing, Wang.
Total concentration. You ready, Jack?
I was born ready.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's time to do another top 10 list. Today, we had someone ask for a top 10 Marvel comic stories of all times. I haven't read all the Marvel stories, but I do have a friend who says he's read every great Marvel comic story, and he's ranked his top 10. We're here to talk about him. The man I am speaking of is the voice of the voiceless, the comic book hoarder himself, the man so cool they call him the Breen. Eric Breen, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you love DC Comics, but in your heart of hearts, we both know that you're a Marvel mark, like pretty much all the way.
That's fair.
So, and you particularly like the Avengers, although there have been a lot of great Avengers stories. So we got a lot of Avengers in here. We got some Spider-Man, Daredevil, X-Men. Shockingly enough, no Thor. What the hell, Breen?
Well, as I said, there's 45 years of reading. The honorable mention list could take us the rest of the day. So just assume that there would be some if the list were longer. And I could make a case for something cracking the top 10, but I kind of went with the best / my favorite stories, and you kind of gravitate more towards what you read when you were a kid, and I just happened to come into the hobby at what I thought was a pretty good time. So my list, even though it stops in the early 80s, that's not indicative of comics post that. It's just that these stories have special meaning to me.
Yep, no problem. Some things I personally, if I had my list, it would be much different than yours because I haven't read all this stuff. But certainly, the Kraven's Last Hunt would be in there. I actually love Civil War, even though a lot of people like to crap on it nowadays. What else would be in there? Born Again from Daredevil. Shocked that one wasn't in there, but there is a Daredevil mention. Also, House of X Powers of 10 would probably make a appearance in my top 10 just because of how important it was to be in the channel. Particularly, I enjoyed covering that comic series so much. But this is about the history of Marvel Comics. The man has read them all, and we're going to go from 10 to number 1. Starting at number 10, we've got the Liberty Legion, covered in Marvel Premiere 29 and 30, Invaders 5 and 6, Fantastic Four Annual 11, and Marvel 2 and 1 Annual number 1. What is so special about this one, Bree?
Well, it took place over 3 titles. It started with the Red Skull coming up with a plan that we took over the minds of the invaders and had them convinced they were actually working for him. So, and when he kidnapped all the members, he deemed Bucky not important enough to even bother with, which led Bucky to finding another group of superheroes, the Liberty Legion, to take on the invaders to try to get their heads back in the right place. Where the Fantastic Four comes in is while Power Man had joined the team for a few issues, when the Puppet Master took over his mind, while they were fighting, he actually accidentally knocked a vial of vibranium off of a table, and it got sent back in time to 1942. The Nazis found it, used it to win the war. So when Reed finds out about that, he has to go back in time with the team to get that canister back. And they do, and they come back, but they didn't quite get everything done. So the Thing had to go back, and he teamed up with the Liberty Legion to finish what they had started. And it was just a really neat story because it was at the time, the Thing was Ben Grimm permanently, and he was wearing a Thing exoskeleton. So when he goes back in time, and the cops are wondering who he is, he goes, "Okay, don't lose your head," and he takes his helmet off, and he meets a little newspaper boy. And the boy is Johnny Ramita. So it's got nice little Easter eggs. It's just a really fun story.
Do we get Dum Dum Dugan in here? Is he part of Liberty Legion?
No, it's a superhero team.
Oh.
And it members like Jack Frost, Miss America. I can't think of any of the other names right now. But it was the rest of the heroes that weren't in the Invaders. And they were actual characters from the Golden Age.
Absolutely. I was starting to recognize some names. So in your number 9 spot, we've got an appearance from Spider-Man. We've got the original Clone Saga. When people hear Clone Saga, they don't exactly get a good impression, but you're saying the original Clone Saga story, Amazing Spider-Man 144 through 149, and Giant Size Spider-Man 3 and 4. That was where it was at? Is this where the Clone Saga should have ended?
That depends. The problem with Marvel in the 90s was everything was done to wretched excess. But if you just put all that out of your mind, go back to, I believe, 1974. Gwen had been killed off about a year and a half earlier, and even though Stan had demanded it, he claimed he didn't, wanted her brought back, and they weren't going to do it the way he wanted, so they found a different way. And the way they set it up was Peter and Mary Jane had just started to find each other. And they shared their first real kiss before he went off to Paris, where he fought a villain called the Cyclone. And he comes back and he sees, it runs into, I believe, Anna Watson, Mary Jane's aunt, and she's like beside herself and saying, "What's wrong?" He goes, "Outside your apartment." And he goes, and it's Gwen. So it's like, okay, you're dead. How can you be here? And the story unfolds. We find out as the story progresses that she is a clone created by Professor Miles Warren, who had been Peter's professor while he was at Empire State University. And as it goes on, we find out that he was actually in love with her. So he created a clone from some samples they'd given years before. And the culmination of the story is he also created a clone of Spider-Man. So the two Spider-Mans have to fight it out. And when they do, when the fight's over, even Peter can't be sure that he's the real one. So that the Clone Saga ends there, but there's a wrap-up issue in 150 where he goes to Doc Connors, who's also the Lizard, and they run some tests. And Peter goes through these trials where he comes across all of his old foes in his mind, and it turns out it's, I think, Professor Smythe. I'm not 100% sure on that, but while he thinks he's dying, it's not Gwen he thinks of, it's Mary Jane. And he realizes the clone wouldn't have those memories. So that's how he knows he's the real Spider-Man. So as I said, it was simple by the second Clone Saga standards, way less bloated, and just told a good, straightforward story. Gwen ends up going off because she realizes there's nothing for her there, and she goes off to live her life somewhere else. And this is a really well done story.
All right, number 8, you've got the return of Count Nefaria in Avengers 164 to 166.
Okay, that one I put in there because the Avengers at the time had been losing more than they were winning, or if they were winning, it was by some kind of where the villain would self-destruct, or they were going through kind of a rough patch. And Count Nefaria, who'd been an X-Men villain of little note up until that point, it was eventually revealed he was the father of Madame Mask, but he found a way to soup up his powers by, he had an ex-Nazi war criminal guy named Professor Sturdy, who came up with a way to boost his power by taking the original Power Man, the Living Laser, I believe, and I can't remember the other one, but he boosted their powers temporarily, where they fought the Avengers, and then their powers faded, and all of it went into Nefaria, who became basically a Superman as a result. And he fights the Avengers, and he just destroys them. And at the time, Thor wasn't on the team, and as we learned later, he kept being plucked out of time by the Collector when they needed him the most. He shows up at the last minute. He fights Nefaria, and he can't beat him. And Yellow Jacket ends up going into the lab and reviving the Vision, who had been taken out by Ultron several issues earlier. And it's the Vision basically just goes up into the air and drops down like a missile onto Nefaria. That's what it takes to end up beating him. And during the story, Nefaria runs into the Wizard, who tells him, okay, that's great. You have all this power now, but you're mortal. He goes, 20, 30 years from now, you'll be dead. Another Hitler scarring the pages of history. So that changes his motivation he wants Thor's hammer, because he believes that would make him immortal. And at the end, after they defeat him, they find out that Sturdy was lying, or that Sturdy was what he had done to him actually it was aging him rapidly to begin with, but then that was going to level off, and he would have been immortal. So that was a little twist at the end of the story, which I thought gave that a neat little ending. But like I said, it was a couple of great battles. There's a moment where Captain America gives his shield to Wonder Man, who's questioning his ability as a hero. And so there's just a lot of really neat things that happen in that story that would be played out in the next major storyline, which will be coming up later in this video.
Next up, we've got the Celestial Madonna. This was just revisited in Empire, shades of the Cree Scroll War and things of that nature, in Avengers 129 through 135 and giant size Avengers 2 through 4.
Yeah, this one had a lot. It started with the death of the swordsman, who had been in love with Manus, who had been more interested in the Vision, and the story it involved Kang, Immortus, Rama Tut. There's a part where Kang brings back dead heroes and villains to fight the Avengers, and we get a taste of Wonder Man coming back because they use him in the story. The original Human Torch, which makes it interesting because the story also reveals the true origin of the Vision at the time, that he was the android, the original Human Torch android. And while this story is going on, there's the quest for the Celestial Madonna, who turns out to be Mantis, who ends up marrying the Kotati plant god, who's taken up the body of the form of the swordsman. We also at the end of the story get the marriage of the Vision and Scarlet Witch. So it was just a very fun story to read, and it still, like I said, it was recently revisited almost 50 years later.
Absolutely. Next up, we're going to something we reviewed already on the channel, Avengers Defenders War. This was an excellent read. Avengers 116 through 118, Defenders 9 through 11. A lot of fun stuff going on here, and one of the first big superhero team up clashes that we ever got as far as a crossover. Yeah,
I said this is one of those best / favorites because this was pretty much just a battle, storyline where kids got to see another thing, or Hulk versus Thor, and we got to see who would win between different heroes. And the plot is pretty straightforward. Dormammu finds a way to break his vow to Doctor Strange to never invade the Earth again by finding something called the Evil Eye, and he uses the Defenders to gather the eyes for him and the pieces that'll reform it. And then Loki's involved in the story, and he lies to the Avengers to say that the Defenders want to conquer the universe, and they tell the Defenders that the Avengers are trying to do the same thing. So that's the reason for the fights. And when they all come together and team up, it's the Scarlet Witch that finds a way to defeat Dormammu, and it's just a really fun story. And it didn't forget the subplots that were going on in both books because Englehart was writing both books. As we mentioned at the time, they had to get permission from Roy Thomas to do the story because they were afraid that too many things could go wrong and that fans wouldn't be interested in something like that. And boy, were they wrong. It's
like the blueprint for the comic industry today.
Yes, you could say that.
Next up, we're getting Return of the Kingpin, Daredevil 170 through 172. I don't know, is this my favorite villain in Marvel Comics? If he's not my favorite, he's right there with the top two. Love Kingpin and Daredevil.
I mean, there's most people, if you ask them what's the greatest run in comic book history, a good number of people are going to say Miller's Daredevil. So there's a lot to choose from as far as great stories and the creation of Elektra, the death of Elektra. You could go there, but for me, it was the Kingpin story because he had retired from crime. He had finally listened to his wife, and he was going to strike a deal with the feds to basically rat out everybody that had worked for him and basically just, take out all the crime lords of up and down the Eastern Seaboard. One of his lieutenants, a guy named Lynch, doesn't like that idea because he sees the Kingpin becoming weak. So he comes up with a plan that while the Kingpin is they set up a deal where he's supposed to arrive on a plane. They blow up the plane, but Kingpin knew about that ahead of time. And then he's fighting Daredevil, and Lynch sets up an explosion that now the Kingpin. Okay, I'm sorry. The Kingpin has this thing worked out where he's going to beat his enemies by emitting a supersonic wave that'll disorient them so he can get his wife back, because these guys have kidnapped his wife. Well, it doesn't work because there's an explosion that levels a building on Kingpin and Vanessa. He survives. As far as we know, she doesn't. So he's back. And there's a scene where Bullseye comes to kill him, and he tells all the people in the room that are working against him, he goes, yeah, he could kill me, or he could recognize who's got the best chance for his continued employment. And that he goes, and he's got the whole time he's got a gun to it. Bullseye has a gun to his head, and he goes, Bullseye, my cigarette. And he lights it for him, says, you got it, boss. He goes, you want me to take them out? I'll give you a group rate. And he goes, nah, they've already been taken care of. But where the story, at the end of the story, or after that scene, he goes to Lynch and then just takes his head and smashes it through a table. And he goes, boss, what are you doing? He goes, you shouldn't have done it, Lynch. You shouldn't have killed my wife. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, I was in the car. He goes, if you'd been in the car, you wouldn't have heard the sonic blast that I emitted, and you wouldn't be having these headaches. So he just basically, he pounds him to death. And then then there's the battle with Daredevil, and he still agrees to turn the guys in. He goes, you can fight me, or you can take this victory. He goes, all these people are going to be arrested, and I'm going to have to start over from scratch. So for a while, your side will be that much stronger. So Daredevil, being a pragmatist, takes the deal. And in the epilogue, you see Vanessa crawling around the sewers. She's alive, but has no idea who she is. So it's just, to me, that was the most powerful story. And it established Daredevil. It basically shifted him from a Spider-Man villain to a Daredevil villain, and just added so much. You realize he was going to be way more formidable than he'd ever been as a Spider-Man villain, which was pretty formidable there. So.
Awesome. Next up at number 4, we've got another comic we reviewed right here on the channel, the Cree Scroll War, Avengers 89 through 97. This is good stuff. We're still hearing remnants of this Cree Scroll War to this day. This comic has been so influential throughout the decades.
Yeah, I credit this as being the first, what I refer to as a sprawling epic in comics, because this basically took place over 9 or 10 issues. And the plot was both the Kree and the Skrull are fighting over Earth as either a strategic outpost or just a planet to be destroyed. And there's all kinds of moving parts, from the Avengers to Captain Marvel to the Super Skrull. Let's see. The Supreme Intelligence, Rick Jones. There's a part where they bring back Golden Age heroes to help fight the Kree, and there's so much goes on in that. And if you want a deeper dive, like I said, we've done this on the channel. It's worth checking out, and it's just a really well done, well crafted story that told people that comics could be more than maybe could be more than what they'd been up to that point.
Absolutely. Now let's get into. It's hard to say. I can't believe this isn't number 1, but it's probably in everybody's top 5. We've got the Dark Phoenix Saga, Uncanny X-Men 129 through 137. The seeds have been planted for a very long time before we finally got the payoff here from Chris Claremont. And I know they can't make a great movie out of it, but damn, it made a really good comic book story.
I think the only reason why it's not number 1 for me is I'm one of those fossils that actually started reading before this story. And so when I started collecting the Avengers, the X-Men were a bi-monthly title, just getting started. So my favorites had already been formed probably before this story, but it's an incredible story. It just what had been building literally since issue 101, with Jean becoming more and more powerful and losing control more and more of the Phoenix Force. Remember, at the time, we didn't know this wasn't going to end up being Jean. So there's the scene at the Hellfire Club where Wolverine, I think the last panel of issue 133 is where Wolverine was cemented as a top 2 or 3 most popular character in Marvel history going forward. When he, you've taken your best shot, sucker. Now here comes mine, or however that line went. And it ended in such tragedy with, Jean, again, she basically goes out for a midnight snack and eats a planet, which it's one thing when Galactus does it, because he is who he is. And, but for Jean, it seemed more like just murder on a genocide on a cosmic scale, and she had to pay for it. And even then, no one could destroy her. She basically had to destroy herself. And it was just, like I said, the tragic love story ending, and I said, it's an incredible story.
Absolutely. The fallout lasts for a very long time. Cyclops is not the same character after that for quite a while. Number 2 on your list, something very well known, the Galactus Trilogy, Fantastic Four 48 through 50. Is it really a trilogy, Breen?
No, actually it's not. The Galactus part of the story is barely more than 2 issues, because Stan and Jack just wrote and drew and created, and the first half of issue 48 is the end of the Inhumans story, and it goes right into, as they're coming home from that, it goes right into the Galactus story, where up to that point you've had Doctor Doom, who is certainly capable of taking over the world. You had Maximus the Mad, who certainly capable of taking over the world, and others. Now you had Galactus, who was there to consume the world. Big difference. And by all accounts, he's unstoppable. And the Watcher breaks his vows more in this story probably than any time before or after, because Earth has come to mean something special to him. And basically, there's nothing the Fantastic Four can do to stop him. And the Silver Surfer, who is his herald, I said, they can't even stop him, let alone Galactus. Now, there's a scene where the Thing sucker punches him off the roof, and he somehow ends up landing on Alicia Masters' ledge of her apartment, where she takes him in, and she's able to convince him that the Earth is worth fighting for. It reawakens something in him that, there's something more to life than just finding Galactus' next meal. So he goes to try to stop Galactus. He's not enough. But unbeknownst to any of them, the Watcher has sent Johnny Storm off to Galactus' world to pick up something called a device called the Ultimate Nullifier. And while he's doing that, when the Surfer comes to confront Galactus, even the Watcher's worried, because he thinks that might mess up his plan to save the Earth. And it all works out. They end up using the Ultimate Nullifier to bluff Galactus into leaving. And he agrees to leave Earth alone if they will give him the Nullifier. So they have to trust this World Eater enough to hand him the only thing that can stop him. But the Watcher says Galactus' word is his law. So they do. And I said, so it some would say maybe a little anticlimactic, but if your foe is unbeatable, there's no other way that story could have ended. But it was the first time that you really realize just how important the stakes are that the Fantastic Four played for. And then the second half of issue 50 is Johnny going off to college. It's like, okay, we just stopped a guy from eating the world. Time to hit the books. But it's incredible. I say it's must reading for anybody in the hobby.
All right, so number 1, another comic we have covered here on the channel, just you and I, the Korvac Saga, Avengers 167 through 177. One of the better, twist ending final reveals in comic history here. Breen, when we finally have Korvac, this is I believe it's Jim Shooter kind of reinventing the character and really elevating, the level of threat to the world.
Yeah, he had been kind of a cookie cutter villain in his first couple appearances, but he finds something that basically turns him into a god, and he comes back to the past to basically, his plans are benevolent, but the Avengers don't know that, and he was a Guardians villain, so the Guardians have come back to stop him, and to get around having to deal with them, he basically, Starhawk finds him first, and he destroys Starhawk and then recreates him, but without any memory of him. So while this is going on, you've got other plots that have come to a head, like the acrimony between Tony and Cap that finally gets resolved. You have another final battle with Ultron. You have, and while this is going on, Avengers keep disappearing, and we find out in issue 173 and 174 that the Collector has been collecting them to basically preserve them because he knows what's coming and he doesn't think that it can be stopped. So at this point, they're down to 4 Avengers. Hawkeye ends up saving the day, and the Collector reveals what his plans were, and we find out that the woman that Korvac, who's going by Michael, is taken as a bride, is the Collector's daughter who was sent there to spy on him, and she legitimately fell in love with him. Korvac kills the Collector, and then he realizes fighting the Avengers is inevitable. So that still takes a couple issues to come to fruition. They find him in a Forest Hills home, and at the time, Peter Gyrich has suspended all Avengers privileges, so they have to take a bus out to the house where Michael's staying. And while they're all talking, they know something's up, but Starhawk thinks they're trying to make a fool out of him because there's nobody there. And that's when Michael realizes, now he knows it's inevitable. So they have to fight, and it's not a fight, it's a slaughter. The only person that gives him any kind of trouble is Captain America, in one of the greatest couple panel scenes where after he's wiped out everybody from Thor to Iron Man to Starhawk, means all these people with alpha level powers, Captain America just attacks him as a man and almost gets the best of him because he is powered down, thinking everybody's been defeated. And even Korvac admits that if Captain America had enough time, he would actually find a way to beat him, but he doesn't. So he kills him too. And then everybody's gone, or dead or dying, and his wife, they basically they try to stop his wife, who she's very powerful too, but then she basically, I guess for lack of a better term, gives up, and Korvac realizes at the last minute that he can't go through with it because, like I said, he is benevolent. His last act is he lets himself die. He brings them all back to life, or at least close enough to where Dr. Blake can save them. And the twist you're referring to is he was the good guy. And ironically, the only Avenger that knew that was Moondragon, who ends up, lapsing into villainy after that. But to me, it's just, so much goes on in these 10 issues. And I know I didn't just do them justice. So go out and read that story if you haven't. Well worth it. And I said, to me, that's been my favorite story for a long time.
Well, I do appreciate it, Eric Breen, counting down the top 10 Marvel stories. According to Breen, we definitely want to hear from the viewers. What do you guys think? What did Eric miss out on? What's your favorite Marvel comic story of all time? Let us know in the comments section, and we'll talk to you next week. We're going to do DC Comics. Thank you very much.